So the presentation I'm going to share with you today is very much our journey, and you know, I've been involved in a few of these community learning exchanges in person, and I think just that journey tends to be the best way of explaining the learning journey that we've been on and are still on. So hopefully I'll just take about 15 minutes to run through that with you. And then okay, so can everybody see the slides and hear me? Good start. So, okay, so I say we are Cothrom, and this is our digital journey. So, a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today is about processes, background, and kind of it's quite text heavy. So I just wanted to reinforce at the start that, you know, as an organisation, we are about the people in our community. And this is just some examples of what we do. We've got a garden where we work with various people. We've got our shop. We do events in the community. We do SVQs, modern apprenticeships. We've got woodworking workshops. And what I've actually missed a picture of is our learning suites with computer rooms that we also have. But, you know, it's just to give you a snapshot and a reminder to myself as much as everybody that ultimately we're a people-based organisation, and everything that we're striving to do is to improve the learning journey for our participants and for our staff. So we are based in South Uist, which is in the Western Isles or the Outer Hebrides, so pretty far from Dumfries and Galloway, kind of out on the western seaboard there, and yet again today our ferry has been taken away to some other island because another one of them has broken down. So you know, we do have a plane service that here as well, but ultimately we are pretty much reliant on a 2.5-hour ferry journey or a 5-hour ferry journey to Mallaig. So that's kind of our location, and I think Sue kind of covered at the start where adult learning, employability, SVQs, community-based adult learning, childcare, retail, furniture recycling. So we have quite a broad range of things that we do, and we very much are about people of all abilities in the community. And we kind of work a lot with people who need to work on their confidence or have barriers to participation in education, training or employment. And it's all about that kind of coming together to try and break down the barriers. So, kind of again, just a snapshot of you know what it looks like. We're quite spread out. We're quite we're a group of 9 islands that we cover from Bernary to Barra. You know, it is a sparse population, reliant on a poor public transport network. If a learner was coming down from Lochmaddy, for example, it might take them an hour and a half and two buses to get here. So being able to offer them an opportunity to participate that doesn't always involve coming to the centre was something that we wanted to develop. Although we do believe firmly that everybody coming together in the centre is really, really important. And you know, obviously we know that that's not happening at the moment, and we're really missing it. But that everybody mixing up together is really important for us. So we needed to think about ways in which that would extend if we had a digital offering. So, starting at the start of our journey, I came into post as the manager in 2017. Sorry, I've gone. In 2017, and I was met with a kind of ongoing fight to get a broadband connection. The cable had actually gone past the front door, but at this point the centre had no connection, and we were being advised it was going to cost about £70,000 to get that connection. So we were working with the MP, we were trying to raise the profile of the demand, we were working through the education department, but ultimately my starting point was you need to find 70k to fix this problem, and and essentially as an organisation you will be stuck where you are if you don't find a solution to this. And on the back of that, we had massively outdated IT equipment across the board. We had computers of every shape and size, but very, very old systems, a server that was creaking at the seams, and the staff skills were pretty low. And we had a very much one person in the organisation knew how to do the IT, and everybody else was told don't touch it. And therefore, any little niggles about printers, connections, were all reliant on this one person. So, started from a very low level. So we came up with a plan. And at this time in the organisation, we had a development worker who was a kind of young guy who'd come in to do a research project for the organisation, and then we'd got funding from Comic Relief to keep him for a year to try and help us progress our digital, moving forward to kind of keep pace with eSchool and learning opportunities that were coming in the more formal education parts. So we sought Seedcorn funding from the UFI VocTech fund, and that was for a digital rollout project to create a bespoke learning environment accessed by all our users, modelled for rollout in other areas and organisations, and that would be underpinned by high quality broadband for staff and learners. Sounds ambitious. It sounds very ambitious, and the reality was that the ambitious project was designed to secure the VocTech funding, which would then fund the broadband connection and the equipment upgrade that was desperately needed for the organisation. And as part of that, we sold the idea that we would create a virtual learning environment project that could then be sold on to other areas. So the question was, can we deliver it? And the short answer was no, definitely not. So, but again, this was a journey, so we'll have a look at that, how that journey progressed. So along the way, we've had some successes. We managed to win the fight for broadband through influence and a bit of good luck. And we ended up paying £3,500, which was considerably less than 70,000 that we had been kind of worst case scenario preparing for. And that was, I do believe that in part asking John Swinney to think about if there was a way he could help us might somehow, I think it filtered through, but I could be wrong. So, but we're very grateful that we did in the end get a solution to that didn't set us back £70,000 that we didn't have. We also secured a £40,000 investment. The council agreed to invest £20,000 in our IT equipment as part of their big eSchool project. And on the 15th of March 2018, I managed to agree with HIE that they would match fund it. Again, I don't think I would have got that funding approval in any other 2 weeks of the year, but that's just one of the quirks of if you've got a good project and it makes sense, then sometimes the luck is on your side. So we were very grateful for that. So that led to us managing to get all our staff on one system. It cut out a huge amount of time wasted and a huge amount of frustration amongst the staff team. And it allowed us to then build on that with staff training, and we took part in the SCVO Digital Champions training and managed to roll that out amongst the staff and some of our learners and participants, and we really kind of increased the baseline of and just really increased the baseline of people wanting to be involved in IT. A lot less of the staff saying, nah, I'd rather write it on a piece of paper. That's where we were really coming at. So we were kind of fresh start, all the barriers removed, ready to go. So the next step was our virtual learning environment project. And even the name, virtual learning environment, it's not a particularly inclusive starting point there. So we went through the process with UFI on appointing a consultant. We had a clear brief. We tried to be as detailed as possible about what it was that we wanted. How much of it was it was a kind of design and build contract, so they were to design it and build it for us, and they were to undertake the stakeholder management that went into the design and build process. My own background is a lot more in construction, so I did feel that the brief that I had prepared was actually a good brief and had all the right points in it. So we appointed a consultant, we agreed a project plan, we had the milestones, we had the critical path, we had a plan for stakeholder engagement with staff, learners, external agencies, all of those people. We undertook the consultation meetings with our key clients, with our staff, with various organisations. We co-designed our project. And the reality was we got an awful lot of head scratching and disengagement. The language just was not inclusive. People didn't understand what it was we were trying to do. They didn't see how it was going to make their working environment easier. And that kind of lack of buy-in led to a lot of slippage in the project and led to a kind of us losing belief in it, you know. And I think with a project like this, you really have to have that belief to take it forward, and that is, you have to have that drive. And as we were going forward, we were losing all of that drive because ultimately we weren't getting the buy-in from the key people. So we redesigned it, we rethought it, we tried to bring people back in, particularly on the staff team. We tried to reach that engagement level and increase the buy-in and try to explain what it was that we were trying to do in order to make it happen and why it would be beneficial to staff and learners. And then, boom, our consultant literally disappeared off the face of the earth. And I think he'd overcommitted, he'd overreached himself. He didn't really have the skills that were required to design and build a scheme like this. And faced with the lack of buy-in from us as a team, just decided it wasn't actually worth it, despite it being quite a lucrative contract compared to what he was used to. So plan B required. UFI worked with us quite closely to try and get us to refocus. What was it we were trying to do? How were we going to achieve it? They asked me to undertake a mentoring programme because they felt that they could recognise that I had lost the belief in the project. I was now leading the project because our member of staff who'd been our development worker had finished, and there wasn't anybody else in the organisation who could take the project forward. And I think there's no doubt about it that that was a flaw in our taking it forward, because I didn't have the time to devote to it. I didn't have the technical understanding, and actually it's not really my thing, you know. IT isn't really my thing. So we made a mistake there, and UFI particularly were keen that I did the mentoring so that they could try to instill in me that I would lead this project and believe that we could deliver it if we just changed things around a bit. So at that stage, we tried to look at some redesign options, and the reality was I made a decision at that stage that actually we had to take the very, very brave decision to walk away from the money that was committed to us to take forward this project and say, this is not going to work. This is not for us. And we can't design something like this, and we cannot create a model that is going to be, you know, sellable or scalable to other people. Our skills level is not there. Our interest is not there. Actually, this isn't what we're about. We're about people, and we're about serving our own community. So a brave decision to think, okay, how are we going to take this forward? And we took a big step back and we said, what is it that we are trying to achieve? And we still felt we wanted a space where we could communicate, share and retain information in a safe and secure way, and that could be recognisable as Cothrom. So that when you went into it, you would see that it was part of Cothrom, and it wouldn't just be something like Google Hangouts where you could be talking to anybody. We feel that branding was something that was really important. So that took us to about January 2020. And then you all know what's coming next. So, and I was looking back and I was reflecting that I've got emails in February of me asking the receptionist to set me up a Zoom account. Have you heard of Zoom? Do you guys use this? Have you ever seen this? To March, April, suddenly Zoom is now just something we all take for granted. So, you know, even just in that space of time, things have changed so dramatically for us. But, you know, we were already sort of starting down this journey of thinking, what's the simple solutions that we can use? Our experience during COVID has been, we had to restrict face-to-face delivery, as I'm sure most people did. We had staff working from home, we had a limited number of staff working, and essentially recovery support was really the main thing that we were still allowed to do face-to-face. But we had a lot of contact with learners, and it varied across the piece whether or not they were engaged in learning activities through remote contact, or whether it was simply a checking in, how are you doing? And that's still pretty much where we're at today. We've had people back in, we're not back in at the moment, we'll be coming back in soon. But the actual activities that people are taking part in are dependent on their level of engagement rather than us setting down programmes. And that includes delivery of employability fund and modern apprenticeships. So we're still able to deliver our formal programmes. So what we found is traditional tools work best. People are still a lot more comfortable with email, phone, face-to-face than they are with Zoom, Google Teams. Teams is never going to work with our client group. Zoom just about, if it's one-to-one. And what we found is that the lack of consistency across the tools, the NHS, council, charities, is actually quite a big barrier, because you know people aren't even sure which one they're using. And then one of the key things that we learned is what engages people is food. And the reason I've got the picture of the biscuits there is one of the things that absolutely just was a light bulb moment for me in last April was one of my staff, just in their own personal Facebook account, put up a picture of these custard cream biscuits and said, today's lockdown activity, I made custard creams. And a couple of people said, oh, they look lovely, give us a recipe. So she posted it on this page, and it's called Isolates. Which was quite a cool name that somebody made up. And it's basically people in the islands showing you what they've eaten. It's great. But she posted this recipe in this picture, and it just went through, and day after day after day, you saw more and more people making these custard cream biscuits and talking about how great they are, and talking about the times that they'd had them. Oh, I always loved those biscuits when I came to a coffee morning at Cothrom. And it really captured that time of lockdown where people were quite happy and quite engaged, and you know, and actually how inclusive it was, and it made it clear to me that there is a role for creating a community through, you know, Facebook or Zoom and all of these things, and trying to capture that spontaneity and trying to capture that sense of community that we could really clearly see in that one example, and trying to bring that into what we do. So that's the sort of, that kind of took us up to last September, when staff were able to come back into the office for at least some of the time. The new plan, sorry, that's a wee bit ahead, I'm getting a wee bit ahead of myself. We've got a 3-day consultancy to look at what free software tools would allow us to deliver shared storage, communication, forms and documents. So we'd started to use Google Hangouts and stuff like that. The answer is here how you use Google, Teams and SharePoint. We encountered a lot of issues about usability, security, privacy, technical support, and found that actually all these three tools in isolation were really good, but when we tried to link them together, we just found we found that really difficult. And what I also found was that if you have a Gmail personal account, it's really difficult to then have a Cothrom Gmail account or a Cothrom account. And actually, this creep of things crossing over. And what really brought it home to me one day was I turned on my work laptop and I opened it up and there's this lovely picture of my newborn son. And I thought, what's that doing there? That's the screensaver from my personal laptop. And I didn't ask it to share it. And it had shared because of the interaction between my Gmail and my Cothrom email Google account. It had shared my screensaver. And I thought, I don't want that picture. You know, that's not the picture that I want. That's my own. And I thought, well, if I'm feeling like this, how can I then ask my learners, a lot of whom have issues, you know, over and above, my own IT skills about being able to understand what they're actually signing up to. And it really gave me a lot to be worried about. And it really, so what we should have asked was, what would work for us? And really should have asked for a bit more information about these technical issues and this background stuff that's going on, because it gave me a few frights along the way, and I thought, I have a lot of responsibility here. We have about 200 learners a year, plus my 20 staff. That's a lot of people who I'm asking to put some IT on their personal devices. I need to know what I'm dealing with. So I was in the office one day and I got a phone call. Would you like a portal designed for training providers where you can share lessons, communicate and store materials and undertake learning? And I thought, actually, I would like to know more about that. And this was a Dutch company called A New Spring. And they approached us and basically said, we think this portal works for the kind of style of delivery that you do. And actually, we had a look at it. We had a couple of demonstrations. We did a price comparison, and actually we decided that this A New Spring portal is going to work for us. And I was hoping to have a demonstration for you, but it's we've put a lot of content on, but what we haven't done yet is get the brand and stuff on it. So it doesn't actually look that good just now. So I decided I won't share it with you until it looks, till it actually looks like a community-based learning portal as opposed to a lot of text, which is what it is at the moment. So we've committed to this. We do pay for it, and we're committed to paying for learners to use it. But I do believe that it's got the right mix of security, privacy, communication, and lots of space for us to put good news stories, lots of space for us to put photos, lots of stuff for us to put, come along to this garden session, come along to this, be part of the community. And even if we are back to or still not working in centre-based stuff, we have a space that we can create a community without all these niggles that I had about using something, one of the more standard sharing points. And I think, and as they said, the onboarding process, but the learning that they've given us goes at our pace, and really we found this to be a really good experience. And I do have another member of staff who's kind of dedicated to updating the content, but all of the staff will be able to use it and it will not be restricted to 1 or 2 people. So, having run through all of that quite quickly, you know, what have we learned? Know your limitations. That for us, you know, I had reservations all the way through. The process of the UFI funding was in train before I came into post, but I committed to phase 2. You know, I committed to the second stage application, and I should have said at the start, I can't lead a project like that. I really can't. I wish I'd had a better understanding of the options, and I wish I had been very realistic about our capabilities, and I would have, you know, I should have listened when the staff told me that they didn't think they could do something that was a Moodle-based bespoke virtual learning environment. We should have listened, you know, a lot more carefully to what the real issues were, and not just said, oh, well, it's resistance to change, it's just because it's different. We should have listened to what the real issues were. But I think, you know, thinking about the usability, and really, I think that issue about cybersecurity and personal privacy are just so important when you're doing something like this. And if it is your organisation that's doing it, you need to be responsible for these things. And I think just thinking about the equipment, there's a massively different experience to using Zoom on a laptop than there is to using it on a phone, and you need to really be careful about not designing your activities, your sessions, because they work on a laptop or a desktop computer. So we're still learning. Our next event with our youth cafe is we have food punks from Tweeddale, which should be some of you guys might know, are going to run a bake-along session with our youth group here via Zoom. That's going to be one of our next sessions. Recovery support, we're seeing an increase in being able to use some of the tools for that. We're getting to grips with how we can do SQA delivery through online portals. There's an awful lot of learning in that, but we're determined to get that right. And I think for everybody, what comes next about Zoom classes and clubs, all these things that have worked really well online, book clubs and things, what's going to be the balance of that going forward? I think there's a lot for us all to think about there. And I think there just is big issues around inclusion and participation. And that's kind of leading us into the questions that we're going to be thinking about. You know, and you know, it is about more than just technical. We've got to think about the social and environmental factors that come into this, you know, and the people, you know, thinking about the participants and thinking about the staff, how they're going to be able to use something like that. I've probably talked for far longer than I'm supposed to, but anyway, that's just a run through of our journey. I'll stop sharing my screen and say I'm happy to take any questions. So.
That's great, Kirsty. Thanks very much. There's always more to say, isn't there? It's just like it's so hard to keep it within. But that was absolutely fascinating, and I think that balance between technical and social and environmental and inclusion is just at the heart of what we're all trying to sort of grapple with at the moment. So we've probably got about 5 minutes if anyone's got any burning questions that they would like to ask. Maybe just stick, because there's a few of us, so you could just stick your hand up if you want to ask a question. Is that you, Marion, looking to ask?
Yes.
Yeah,
it was just, Kirsty, it was the balance between respecting people's sort of traditional skills, what they were used to doing, and helping people to maybe embrace new things. I mean, how did you get that balance right?
Badly to begin with. So I think it's what really made the difference for us was when we did the SCVO Digital Champions training, and we identified, and then we allocated staff as digital champions, and we made it part of their role in the organisation to support other people in the organisation, be they staff, be they learners, in using the IT. And we made that much more an open part of what, as an organisation, we're about. So rather than it being an issue because you had to ask somebody, it was very much saying, look, we need to, you know, you need to, that's just part of our culture now, is that we're all striving to improve what we do. And the other thing is I have accepted that there are limits to how much of this people are willing to do, and we have developed some workarounds, and more or less technical support is available to staff depending on their needs. And for me that works, because it just suits us as an organisation, and we have the capability to do that. It won't work forever, but I'm kind of hoping that as the culture of more use, once people start to see it's making it easier, then they get on board with it. But I think it's just that cultural, it's deciding what's the cultural way in which you're going to attack it, as opposed to saying at staff meetings, you must all learn how to do this. Yeah.
Great, that's really helpful. Any other questions for Kirsty?
I was wondering, obviously with people kind of changing their behaviours and saying, actually, yeah, I'll give it a go, and oh, it's not as hard, or actually it's much harder, but I've been able to do it. Did anyone comment, like staff or users, that they found it easier to do things in like private aspects of their life as well? Like, did you see it confidence kind of transfer into other things too?
Yeah, we deliver a horticulture SVQ to Stornoway. And when we committed to doing that, it was on the basis that the tutor would be able to travel up and down on a reasonably regular basis, but of course she can't do that. So at the moment, so we're doing it all by Zoom at the moment, and that's the first programme that's going to be launched in the spring on the portal. And having seen it and having got used to it, then that tutor, who was probably the most resistant to using it, has said, "Oh, and I was doing my daughter, and now, and can you go and show me how that works?" And that enthusiasm spreads. But it's definitely, we're seeing a lot of crossover into people's own, into their own lives, and with learners as well. We're starting to see them saying, "Oh, could you show me how to do it for my sister?"
Mm-hmm.
Then being able to do that as well.
Great. Any other questions for Kirsty?
John has his hand up. Would you like to unmute?
Thanks, and thanks, Kirsty. That was really interesting. I was thinking about, you said in the first phase before the pandemic about your commitment to co-design. I was wondering how you've got on with involving learners in the current phase in terms of helping to design a new portal.
So at the moment, we've taken feedback from, I say we're doing this horticulture course online, and that's the first kind of formal online delivery that we've been doing. So we've taken some feedback from the two students there and from their supporting employers. And it's thankfully it's consistent with what our own understanding about basically it's that thing about it being in a closed space, so that it's not in, that their coursework's not in their personal emails, that kind of stuff. And recording, because they do a lot of recording of videos, and that's how they're gathering evidence. So but as an organisation, we've tended to work with learners in a fairly informal way of getting feedback. We've done some design thinking workshops and over the years, but it's very much a case of saying that you came in and you got that digital champion input. What next? So the next phase will be starting to cherry pick some key kind of learners, some who we think have the skills already and some who don't, and actually start trialing some of it. But we've had to kind of take a bit of a leap of faith, just because the learners who we're in touch with are the least digitally able at the moment. That's the reality. And what's very, very clear is there's still a massive demand for digital participation, digital champion work. it's, you know, there's still a huge demand for that, but we are working with some of the other groups about how we can build some of that in.
Posted the questions in the breakout room questions in the chat, which are, how representative do you think today's poll is? So that's really thinking about, you know, are we an unusual bunch? Are we pretty much mainstream, middle of the road in terms of our levels of digital engagement? So getting you to think about that, getting you to think about how easy it is for people that you work with to engage with you digitally, where you're at on the kind of journey that Kirsty was so eloquently describing for us. And also, what do you need to do to make it happen? What's on your agenda in terms of taking this agenda forward? So I think if you can put us into breakout rooms, we're going to pop into 2 breakout rooms. I'll be in one, Kirsty will be in the other. So just to pick up on some of the key points from the discussions, I don't know, Kirsty, have you got someone from your breakout room who's going to report back, or are you doing it?
Does anybody else want to join?
No, you do it, Kirsty.
Okay. We kind of, so we were quite a mixed group. We had John there from Education Scotland, Marion, who tends to work with older people, and I think he's disappeared, is it, Jason? Not Jason, I've forgotten what the other guy. Brian, oh there he is, you were hiding. And Brian's in a different league because he's talking about esports careers and things, so we were all kind of coming from a slightly different angle, but what we really kind of covered was there is older, you know, that older age group is the one that's really, really difficult in terms of engagement and thinking about the safety and the security and how you get that message across. And we came back round to thinking that that branding and that, you know, creating the relationship of trust was really important in order to, you know, if you're going to do a project, make sure it's clear who's doing it and how you're communicating it, and try to find a way of reaching that that age group that can't necessarily, it's not intuitive. And we had a bit of a talk about, you know, the esports community being fairly well engaged, and you know that, but actually how might they how might that then reach other people, including thinking about some of the young people who I'm involved with, and then we went down a wee bit of a eSchool VC rabbit hole of thinking about, you know, what is the big stuff. And I think what we really kind of decided was that we know that there are things like Google Meets and Teams and VC and all of these things, and the reason why as an organisation Cothrom's gone down this route of its own is because there are still a lot of challenges, and ultimately it's about, if we are to get to the stage where it's a bit more joined up, and community learning and development, which a lot of us are involved in, does need a significant investment programme probably. And if we're not going to get that, then we'll just, you know, we'll try and make it, we need to try and make things integrate as well as we can. But so that was kind of our discussions, which, as I say, wide ranging. It's probably the best way.
Pretty good for 15 minutes or 20 minutes. I think that's all we had in the end. So impressive. I think Ailsa's going to feedback on the discussion from our breakout room. So thanks very much.
So we had Jason, Mandy, myself, and Sue. So Mandy works primarily with young people with learning disabilities. So she's looking at how they'll be able to access learning materials online and the accessibility aspect of that to save folk travelling like long distances and looking at different things. Jason, bit more like community focused and also working with partnership with existing services to pull people in that way and kind of have them referred. And then Sue and myself, our focus on digital engagement is we run the Rural Social Enterprise Network and the hub, so it's like how we reach out to social enterprises across rural Scotland and get them to kind of come into the peer support and peer learning environment. So I feel like we spoke for ages, but we kind of started off saying that like a lot of the things like Teams and Zoom and whatever else it might be is like a lot of it to do with exposure. And if you've worked in a job where you've had to use it, you'll be more familiar with it. But then in your personal life, folk are using lots of different things like WhatsApp or Facebook. So a lot of it and the exposure you've had probably depends on your age and like what you've worked as well and how familiar you'll be with things. And so I think it was highlighted as well that the team at SCVO were really good at linking people up with different organisations who are doing similar things, so you can kind of learn from them. So just like the value of peer-to-peer learning and like not having to reinvent the wheel and just like learn about what other folk have done, so you don't have to go down and do the same thing. But we were also talking about kind of like crib sheets and like Zoom sheets for like how to use Zoom on an iPad or how to open up Microsoft Teams and that sort of thing, because we just felt that like especially with so many rural social enterprises being small and being limited in time, like folk are barely have enough time to like be running about doing all the things that they already have to do, on top of can you write out a Zoom sheet for how to use Zoom on the phone for this person who's wanting to join a meeting. So I think we were kind of came to the conclusion that like a sort of resource bank where you could download templates or like how-to guides that folk have already put together would be really useful. And then also they would just be like basic templates so that if you knew that there was an old person who uses different words for something, they can be individualized and changed depending on what you're using them for. So yeah, I think, does anyone else want to add anything? Sue, have you got anything else to add, or Jason or Mandy?
I don't think so. I think the only other point came up was Jason's point that because Jason works on digital participation and you actually haven't had the kind of level of engagement that you thought you might have during the COVID, you know, whilst people have been locked down. So that's kind of interesting, I think, in terms of people aren't self-referring and coming forward, they're being referred by other organisations or agencies. Yeah. So interesting discussions. One idea there in terms of some kind of central resource bank that people might be able to link into, and I think Jason had some ideas about someone who might be able to help with that. But any other kind of general points or general thoughts coming through from the discussions? Any issues that you think it would be worth taking forward collectively?
I had something that I was just getting going with at the end of our discussion, which was where you had something like public sector using particular types of hubs, how they could be, and particularly if we're talking about community learning, how that could be expanded so that it's open to people who are not employed by that particular authority or that. So there's a whole lot of public sector things that are just in-house things, and they're not accessible really. Now that's my ignorance because I don't know enough about the systems, but I know that team, I could not work it, even though I was trying to join a session. And I know that there are other ones that are specific to particularly the health sector or the education sector or whatever, or school sector. And it's how, you know, that has been opened up, particularly education sector, in terms of kids now taking part. So how far can we further push that in terms of discussions with public sector agencies? But that's because I'm totally ignorant about the other systems.
Oh no, anyone want to comment on that? Kirsty, maybe you have things.
I think it is thinking about, you know, keeping it as simple as possible, and, you know, just making sure that you've really tried to imagine all the different types of users. Is the key thing. One of the things that worked very well here was we had a programme running, the health board were running a programme called Empower, and it was basically designed to link people in the community to existing resources. And that was primarily about making them aware of gentle movement classes, or you know, a certain practitioner, or if they needed physiotherapy or something, making sure that they knew how to get it. So that very quickly transformed into being able to get them a device or talk people through And I think it'll be very, very interesting to look at the evaluation of that programme and see, because it's been very, very successful, but the reality is it's down to that person whose only job is to be the conduit, and how actually for not a huge amount of money that had a real impact. And is that something that we actually do need? So they were called community navigators. You know, is that something that would be a worthwhile investment, rather than lots and lots of us separately trying to do these things? And you know, I think as well, just sometimes it is about being upfront with, if you know that there's a big resource out there that you don't have access to, you know, and it's because it's got a closed membership group, it's actually just about saying, well, could I get access? Is there a way that I can get some of that resource because I want it for this reason? And actually sometimes these organisations and agencies are more open than we give them credit for. You know, that's certainly, you know, one of the organisations that's been great for us throughout the COVID stuff has been Revolve and Zero Waste Scotland. You know, they just have had endless amounts of resource and support and things, and you know, just sometimes they're more willing to help us, so it's worth asking if we know it's there.
No, that's good.
But yeah, just I think there's just such a big job going forward with a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. John, were you wanting to say something?
I think it's been covered. I'm just really going to echo Marian's point originally. I think it was me that took us down the rabbit hole about Escoil, I think. But I'm aware with other things like Glow as well, you know, there's obviously that balance of safety, and particularly when young people are accessing these kind of big public sector forums or platforms. But the safety things can then lead to exclusion, and the things where a lot of investment are going into them can't be accessed by everybody in the way that maybe they should be. But yeah, so I didn't have any great answers on that one, but I think people are right to flag up when these things are not working for them. And I'm also going to be really interested to see how the bespoke system that Kirsty and our team are putting together works out for them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and we're looking forward to being kept updated on progress and where it's got to. I'm conscious we're, as always, running out of time, but some really key points there to take forward. I think it's about, you know, how do we make things inclusive, and what do we do to make sure that, you know, whatever we do addresses those types, you know, different types of users and different needs that people might have for accessing things. The idea about public sector platforms may be more accessible than we think, and maybe we're not always asking those questions, and in terms of taking those forward. And then the idea about establishing or trying to share resources in some kind of way, either a resource bank or you know, via a particular organization or whatever. But those are kind of three key actions that seem things that can be taken forward from this morning. Was there anything else, Kirsty, that you would want to add at this stage?
No, I think that's kind of covered it. You know, say if anyone's got any particular questions, just drop me a quick email and I'll reply. But yeah, thanks everybody. It's been really interesting having a chat through some of that.
Well, absolutely. Thanks to you, Kirsty, because it's always a big ask to host one of these sessions. But I think it's been a really helpful session, and I think people are going away with some very practical ideas and have learned, you know, from you very honestly sharing your journey. And I think that's what's really important about a learning exchange, is that people do tell it warts and all, and it's not, you know, here's our whizzy thing and this is how good we are, but these are the issues we faced, and these are the challenges that we've overcome.